Okay, Tony. Shall we? You said you had some an afterthought.
Yeah, well, it was something that the group did. We didn't, or the group and the commando did. We didn't do it very often. We were well trained in it. We sort of kept our skills up in it all the time, and that was the use of the 81mm mortar being deployed by a helicopter.
Wow. Okay.
So when I joined the group in those early days, they already had these drills pretty much down packed, and we started. I had to go and learn them, so that they would send me and some other guys and one of the NCOs to that mock-up helicopter in the front of the training troop, and we used to do heli-mortar drills from that mock-up. And what happens with the heli-mortar drills is you've obviously got a mortar team that's airborne in a helicopter, and we had a special bag that was made up. I don't know who designed the bag. It was already in common use. It was already, the commander had 3 of them, I think, when I joined the group. And you put a partially assembled mortar, 81mm mortar in this bag, and it clipped onto, they had quick release hooks on it, and you clipped it onto the steps on the side of the alouette.
Sure.
So the team would be deployed by chopper. So they could take you and put you in places that you couldn't get by vehicle. Yeah. So it opened up a lot of possibilities. And that was at this drill, but as the war progressed, so the drill progressed and changed slightly, And I was used operationally quite a few times, as was Dutch de Klerk, Clive Dredge, and Buzz Dalgeris also did quite a few of them.
Sure.
And it was a pretty random thing, they'd come and put a team together quickly, and you'd take ammo and a couple of choppers, and off you'd go and do a shoot and then come back. And just to give you a rundown of how this thing started off working was, you would have the heli-mortar bag strapped onto the alouette, and the mortar team would be in that same alouette. And then there would be a second chopper that carried the ammunition. And when we first started doing it, when we went across into Mozambique, there would be a third chopper with a 4-man stick in it. And the idea being that the 4-man stick got into all-round defense around the base plate position to protect you. But as you know, 3 helicopters is a full FireForce, just minus the K car.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It became too cumbersome, and the aircraft were needed elsewhere. So eventually it was cut down to 2 choppers. One with the one with the mortar and the crew, and the second one full of ammo. And what would happen is there was 2 ways that this was done. The most common way we did it was that one of the helicopters, normally the one that carried the mortar, became the airborne fire controller.
Okay.
So what happens is they'd take you and they'd drop. They'd be given a target, and then they would scout an LZ within mortar range of the target, and they would deploy you into a base plate position. So the first chopper would land, and the crew would disconnect the mortar from the helicopter, and it would take off, and then they would open this bag and they would assemble the mortar in the base plate position. And we normally carried about 6 rounds of ammo in that first chopper to bed the mortar into the ground. Now, when I say bed the mortar in, people have got to understand that this thing's just standing on top of the ground, and you bed it in to get the base plate into the ground. It actually, on a maximum charge, pushes the base plate into the ground, which gives you a stable position from which to fire the mortar. And the second chopper would land, and the number 3 mortarman would go and start pulling the ammo from the second chopper and bring it up to the base plate position. The first chopper that dropped you off would then do an orbit around the base plate position. As soon as the second chopper was out, he would fly directly over where the mortar was going to be set up in the direction of the target. And the CPO and the number 1 would then put an aiming post into the ground in the direction that the chopper had flown. That gave you your aiming point from which to do your corrections. And then we would bed the mortar in. Now, when we first started doing it, we used to bed the mortar in 180 degrees away from the target, because the idea was we didn't want to warn them that we were coming. And that first bomb was normally set on safe, so it didn't detonate. It would just bury itself in the ground. Now, and then we would turn the mortar around and start setting up on the aiming post. And then the chopper pilot would start feeding back how far we were from the target and the rest. So the control post operator could set the mortar up in a correct barrel angle and ready to take the first shot at the target to range it. Now, just to give you an insight, I spoke about that incident where that bomb detonated in the barrel. To bed the mortar in, it was just a bare mortar without the sights on it, set up at a specific angle. And the number one would put his right foot on the base plate, and the number two would put his left foot on the base plate. And on the bipod, there was a suspension system. And the two of them would pull the suspension system back so that there was no suspension left in it. And then the number two would put a bomb down the barrel, and it was normally on maximum charge. And when that bomb went off, that bedded the base plate into the ground. And what happened with Porky Christie Smith and Kraf Jonker was when you're in that bedding in position, you're actually in contact with the barrel, both of you. So when that bomb detonated in the barrel, it was like the steel was in contact with their bodies. And that's why it was had such a bad ending. But anyway, you now bedded the mortar in. We're now doing it. Before we used to bed it in 180 degrees away. That changed. We would bed in facing the target, and we would use live ammunition with it on fire. And we normally had a couple of smoke rounds with us. So in the beginning, we started to do the chopper who's doing the pilot who's doing the fire controlling from the air. He would be higher up. The second chopper would be circling behind the base plate position, and he was acting as our stop group. He was covering us with his machine gun in case anybody come to try and attack the crew on the ground. The guy, the chopper pilot doing the controlling, would fly around, and he would try to get himself directly behind the mortar and in line with the target to make it easier for the corrections onto the target. So we'd have the range, we'd set the mortar up, we'd fire one ranging round, and you would see where the round fell, and then he would give the adjustment to the control post operator, who would change that into readings on the mortar, and then you would fire another ranging round until you got on target, and then you would fire for effect to neutralize the target. And then once you'd fired everything that they wanted you to fire, then you would dismantle the mortar, put it back in the bag, and the choppers would come back in, pick the ammunition up if there was any left over. Most of the time we fired it all, then come back and pick the mortar crew up, and you'd leave. The second way was it was done exactly the same as this way I've just described to you, but instead of one of the helicopters being the fire controller, there would be a fixed wing above you with a fire controller in the fixed wing aircraft, and he would control the fire from higher up. He had a better view of the target and everything, obviously, than a helicopter would. So that was the second scenario of how this thing worked. Now, in the beginning, the fire control in a fixed wing would normally have come from the group or the commando. But we ended up with guys like Cocky Beneke, where you didn't need to have anybody else but him up there because he was so good at this sort of stuff, So in some cases, the fixed wing pilot would actually become the fire controller. He would direct the fire onto the target. And like I said, we did this a number of occasions, mostly into Mozambique. We did a couple internally, but mostly into Mozambique. We would go in and hit targets.
Would the fixed wing be a lynx?
Yeah, so it's normally a lynx, and I'll get to that later, because sometimes we weren't effective enough, and then the lynx would go and put his own strike in, on which happened. But that's going to unfold now. I'll tell you. So, what happened was the group came back. Well, I think we were at that group commando stage, and we arrived in Mount Darwin, and I was put into as part of the FireForce. I was in one of the first wave sticks. I was a sergeant at that stage of the first wave stick, and I was called into the ops room and told that I've been taken out of FireForce, and that I was being sent away with a mortar to go to Mukumbura, and that I needed to sort out the mortar crew get a heli bag and draw panniers. We had canvas. I drew panniers because I preferred the ammunition to be in panniers. Was canvas panniers that you wore over your shoulders on route marches. And I was to take all the mortar ammunition that we had with us. I was to take 2 weeks dry rations, and I was to head to Mukumbura, and I was to report to there was a territorial unit based in Mukumbura, and I was to report to their boss. And the briefing was that I would go to him and they would give us a space to set up a camp inside their camp, but that we didn't fall under their command. They had no jurisdiction under us at all, and that we fell under direct command of the jock. And that we were being sent there to hit targets inside Mozambique. And the idea was that they picked up lots of potential targets in Mozambique, and they didn't have the troops or enough aircraft, etc., to attack those camps. So what they wanted to happen was they wanted to let those camps know that we knew where they were, and hopefully cause them to do one of two things: either bolster their defenses on the camp, or preferably to pack up and move, which was a hassle for them. And I think this was the main sort of this, was to let them know we knew where they were and to make them move their camps, so to disrupt their normal routine. So off we went to Mukumbura, got into the base camp there. What we did was I spoke to their boss man there, and we set up an above ground mortar pit with sandbags, and we would mount the 81 at night for camp defense, and in the early morning we would take it down and put it into the heli bag and get ready to go out. And it was a lot of kicking our heels because there was nothing for us to do. It was waiting for availability of aircraft, And they came in, and we did about 3 or 4 shoots on small camps fairly close to the border, and they didn't know whether those camps were temporarily occupied or permanently occupied, but they can see there'd been movement in and out of them. And those first couple of shoots we did, it was with the 2 helicopters only. And we would go in and we would hit those camps, and then we would obviously finish the shoot and then pack up and come back to Mukumbura. And the worst thing about these things was you never known what sort of effect you'd had on the other side. You just didn't know what was going on whether you'd killed anybody, how good your hits were on the camp, etc. So those, we started off with those. And then the one day we went down to the airstrip and we were waiting. The 2 choppers arrived, and we were starting to get ready, and the pilot said to us, "No, we must wait. There's a fixed wing coming in." So we waited, and a fixed wing came and landed at the airstrip, and none other than Cocky Benica got out of it. And everybody knew Cocky Benica. I mean, he had eyes like eagles. That guy could find camps everywhere. And I think what had happened was, obviously, Cocky Benica had recce these camps out. But we were limited by one thing from the jock on how we could hit these camps. Was we were limited that the helicopters took off with a full tank, and the targets had to be within range that the choppers could fly there, loiter while we hit the camp, and pick us up and get us back to Mukumbura without refueling. So that was the big limitation we had on. So anyway, Cocky arrived, and we got all the maps and everything out, and we showed us where the camp was and what his plan was. So we went through our normal drill. Even when you had a fixed wing above you, the chopper still flew over your base plate, because the pilot would talk to the pilot in the chopper, and he would fly over us, and we would put the aiming post in the ground, and then he would orbit around to the back or one side of us to stay out of, because of the bombs in the air, you see, so they were always sort of to the side of us or behind us. And we hit this camp, but now this time we'd taken a lot of ammo with us. We had maximum amount of ammo we could get on the chopper. And we hit the camp, and once we were on target, we just emptied all the ammo we had. And what happened was the camp was occupied.
Yeah.
people started to leave the camp. Those guys, they all had crash RVs around the camps, the same as we used to do when we were on externals,
Yeah.
And Cocky Benneker figured that, no, you seen where these guys were going to their crash RVs, so he went and put a strike in on the crash RV, and we came back to Mukumbura. And that was quite successful because Cocky could tell us that he'd put a good strike in on them, because they seemed to be gathering in a sort of certain area around there. So that was how that came off. The second time we went out, I don't know if it was Cocky, because it sounded like Cocky on the radio, but the links never landed at Mukumbura. It came over while we were in the air. He came and joined us, and we were hitting the camp, and then he gave us some big corrections. We were firing for effect, and then he came back with some big corrections. So what I assume is that he was trying to get the ammo to now get the full off shot onto wherever these guys were moving to, and it was pretty difficult, because if you think about it, he's up there, these guys are gapping it out the camp. He's looking there and he's saying, well, these guys are going to run to that point. How long is it going to take them to get there? And then we have to give them, when we were firing, we used to give them the time of flight of the bomb. In other words, how long it was in the air from the time we fired it. We used to say shot, time of flight, 65 seconds or whatever, So he's trying to calculate that how far these guys are going to run in from the time we fire the round to get the round to land on top of. I think he was just experimenting, and it didn't work too well. We didn't get anywhere near them. So once again, Cocky went in and put I'm sure it was Cocky, went in and put an airstrike in on them. So it became simpler for us to hit the camp and Cocky to hit wherever they were going. So that was the way it sort of ended up going. We never got any feedback. I was there for a month. We spent a whole bush trip at Mukumbura, which was quite nice for us because we were out of that FireForce, that FireForce grind, day in and day out of, So we were out of that grind. So it was quite a relaxing bush trip for us. Although flying so far into Mozambique with just the Lynx as top cover was like, So we spent a month doing that. And the worst part about it was that when we did go back and join the commander and we went back to Salisbury, we were never ever given any feedback on how effective that had actually been, because we used a lot of ammo. They had to resupply us with ammo quite a few times. Because, we weren't going in there and lobbing into those big camps. We weren't putting 20 rounds in there. We were putting 60 rounds in there. We would put in as much as we could get on the choppers that they could fly.
Yeah.
So we never got any feedback from it. And I don't recall anybody ever going in and doing such a sustained trip as we did. I did do sort of the odd heli-mortar shoot here and there, as did Dutch de Klerk and Clive Dredge and Bas Dalgeris. Whoever was available were the guys that were sent to go and do it. But that heli-mortar thing seemed to fade away. And I think basically what got rid of the heli-mortar story was at about that same time, they started experimenting with mounting the mortars on the back of the Unimogs, the 2.5-ton Unimogs.
Yes.
And I remember that they'd been playing with the idea, and they actually sent one up to the commander in the bush. And it came up, there was a really sort of Heath Robinson type thing with in the back of the Unimog with railway sleepers and sandbags, And they'd beefed up the suspension on the Unimog, and they came out there and we put an 81 in the back of this thing and started firing it, and it was fine on low charges, but it couldn't take a maximum. The suspension couldn't hold that thing on charge 7. What I did miss out on when I was talking about the heli-mortar drills that we did in Mukas was that the on those big camps, they kept us as far away from those camps as possible. So we fired everything on maximum charge. We were charge 7 most of the time we were hitting those camps. So we were about 5-6 kilos from them, a long way. So they couldn't react to us quickly, We would be out by the time they realized where we were. So anyway, back to the vehicles. So that thing was taken away. It didn't work. And then, I don't know, I think they might have collaborated with the South Africans a bit. And eventually they came out with that Unimog that you could like permanently mount a 81 in the back of it. and was used successfully. I was the CQ at that stage, so I didn't even get to fire a mortar off the back of those things. But that's de Klerk, Clive Dredge, and Buzz Dalgeris did. I know Buzz Dalgeris took some of those things into one of those big ops and used them. They used them very successfully. So I think those the mortar mounted on the back of a Unimog basically did away with the helicopter mortar story, because after that it sort of died a slow death.
Yes.
And I know the SAS had a Heli-mortar bag because they came across and they copied our one and then they built their own. So I don't know how often the SAS used theirs, and I'm pretty sure the Scouts would have put one together as well.
Yeah. Gosh, that's interesting. I've been interviewing, I've been editing the interview that Tony Ballinger did with General de Vries, and the South Africans in Angola in around about 1987, I think. They had 120 millimeter mortars. Did we ever use 120 mil mortars?
No, we were on in the commando. We were on, so there was always that thing that we were going to get them,
Okay.
But it never materialized,
Yeah.
But there would have been a welcome addition, because you got the extra range and that more punch on the other end,
Yeah. I think they also mounted them on the Rottel 90s.
Yeah, they would have had to mount that thing on a big vehicle, because a 2.5 ton
Yeah.
Unimog would never have taken the recoil from that thing.
Yeah.
When they brought that test vehicle out to us and we tested it, we actually broke the suspension on that thing, firing on maximum charge.
Sure. Are you in comms with Clive Dredge?
No, I'm not. Every now and then I can get to him on Facebook, but I think Clive has basically been like me. I think he's shied away from doing this.
Right.
As I did. I've watched enough, and it's now, like I said, I've done this so that my son can.
Yeah. Last time I saw Clive was at the RLI 50th anniversary reunion.
Buzz Dalgeris is still around, and he's also on Facebook. He's John Dalgeris on Facebook.
Gosh, that's interesting. Thank you very much, Tony. Much appreciated, brother.
Yeah, it was just something that came as an afterthought, because I know that,
I've never heard this before. Yeah,
and it was used. It was successful, but it just wasn't used. I don't think to its full potential. You could have done exactly the same thing with a 60 millimeter mortar and perhaps carried more ammo, but that would have put you closer to the base camps that you were going to hit. You were with a 60 mil would have been within range of retaliation.
Yeah. Did you? Yeah. So who would have given you feedback? It's a pity you didn't get any feedback.
But it would have come back from the jock. But we never. It might have come back to maybe Pat Armstrong. I can't remember who was the boss then, whether it was Pat Armstrong or Nigel Henson. Maybe they got feedback, but the feedback never came back down to us.
Yeah, I'm in comms with Nigel Henson, so I can ask him.
Ask him, because I would like to know whether they moved those camps or whether they just bolstered the defenses, and waited for us to attack them.
Yeah, I'll ask Nigel. Maybe he knows something.
Yeah,
and I'll let you know.